Hello everyone, I'm Anna Kasparian, and we're about to have an awesome interview with Nobel laureate winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. We're going to talk about neoliberalism and what he refers to as progressive capitalism. I hope you enjoy. Thank you for taking the time to have this conversation. And, as a Nobel laureate winning economist, which economic trend do you see today that concerns you the most?
Well, obviously, there are two that have me greatly concerned. One is the growth of inequality with all the political implications that it has. The second is climate change, that we're doing better than we were, but nowhere near as fast as we have to. And unless we respond, there's a real problem ahead.
So it's interesting that you mentioned climate change. I agree with you. I think that climate change is an existential threat to everything, including, obviously, our way of living. But most people say that, you can't really do too much on climate change. For instance, you can't accomplish the Green New Deal without hurting jobs, right? That it actually hurts the economy, which I'm not buying, but can you explain why?
That's absolutely wrong. And it's a question I've studied a lot. I think responding to climate change is probably the best way to strengthen our economy, not only now, but for years to come, in terms of making it more dynamic, more innovative. The solution, thinking about the problems of how do we move from fossil fuel, which has been the basis of our economy for the last 200 years, into a renewable, sustainable economy, is going, we've achieved enormous innovations in the digital economy.
That's right.
Digital is part of the foundations of moving to this renewable economy, sustainable economy. And if we only used a fraction of that ingenuity, for instance, that we use to get better advertising, rather than using it for better advertising, let's make it so we can live and sustain. So to me, this is really one of the most important opportunities that we have. But it links with another issue that I think is of first order importance. A lot of people have been worried about how AI and technological change and robotization are going to lead to massive unemployment. A few years ago, Ben Bernanke, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, talked about a savings glut. In Europe, interest rates are negative. So we have excess labor, excess capital, and here a lot of people are saying, we can't afford to make the green transition. And I scratch my head. I say, we live in parallel universes. Do we have too few or too many resources? And the answer is very clearly, if we put ourselves on the way to the green transition, we can avoid the dire predictions of those who say we're going to have too much labor and too much capital.
Exactly. I mean, it's essentially investing in a completely new industry that would require more jobs. It would require people to, maybe individuals who work in the fossil fuel industry right now would have to go through training, but they would transition to something that's not only better for our environment, but it's also better for them economically.
Yeah, just think about coal miners. That was never a good job. It was a good paying job, but you got black lung disease, it was hard work. And you compare that to, say, a solar panel installers. It's a better job, higher paying job, and actually we've created more, multiple times more solar panel installers than we've lost in jobs in coal mining. So, the economy is always restructuring. This is another example of restructuring. The market on its own often doesn't manage this restructuring, and that's why there's an important role for government. And one of the main themes in my book, Progressive Capitalism, is about the role of government in trying to facilitate, help people make that structural transformation.
I'm glad you mentioned your book because I wanted to ask you about it. So, in your title, you mention progressive capitalism, and many people, young people especially right now, who are critical of capitalism would argue that that's an oxymoron. And so what do you exactly mean when you say progressive capitalism? What is that?
So what I mean by, it's a new social contract between the market, the state, civil society. It represents rebalancing. For the last 40 years. We put the market at the top and put everything else down below. And that's why we've gotten into this mess that we're in. So we have to have a rebalancing. When I talk about that, I actually emphasize that we need a rich ecology of institutions, cooperatives, not-for-profits, a whole set of institutions. Dividing the world into these simple categories is I think, misleading and wrong. But the reason I use the word capitalism is just to remind people it's still going to be, markets are important, firms are important. For parts of the economy, the profit motive will continue to be important. But it's not the only thing in life. In fact, even in the profit sector, we have to have a broader view. It's not only maximizing shareholder value, it's concern about your workers, your customers, your communities, the planet we live on. So it's a new view of how we manage our market economy, our society. And the reason I use the word progressive is to hark back to the period at the end of the 19th century, where, again, inequalities were very high. And we introduced a whole set of reforms on social legislation, monopoly power legislation. That's why power is in there.
Right.
A whole set of what are called progressive reforms that actually did result in inequality coming dramatically down, but then it started going up again at the neoliberal reforms beginning in the 1980s.
Absolutely, and I appreciate your critique on those neoliberal reforms that have led us to this intense inequality that we're experiencing all over the world, but particularly in the United States right now. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Democratic primaries. And this is a little bit of a self-indulgent question because we're at this international conference, but I can't help myself. So in the media, there seems to be this framing that makes it appear as though Senator Elizabeth Warren and Senator Bernie Sanders are carbon copies. They're the exact same candidate. Now, anyone who's paying close attention can see the differences, and I wanted to get your thoughts. What do you think about Elizabeth Warren's theory of change versus Bernie Sanders? Because he's more focused on people power, empowering people to push for the change that they want. Whereas Warren thinks that it's much more pragmatic to reform from the inside the establishment.
So let me first say that that all the Democratic candidates differ. Their differences are small compared to the differences between them and Trump.
I mean, that's a low bar, though.
That's a low bar.
It's a very low bar.
You're absolutely right. But no, let me emphasize, though, that if you ask a set of principles, okay, they're all in favor of access to health care for all. They're all in favor of gun control. They're all in favor of reproductive rights. They're all in favor of giving opportunity for everybody in our society. They're
You
all.
think Mike Bloomberg is in favor of all those things?
Yeah. And he actually has come out in support of more progressive taxation. And I think he really means it. Not as progressive as Elizabeth Warren.
Not even close.
So,
yeah.
But it is still very progressive compared to anything that's happened on the other side.
Can you argue that someone's really in favor of progressive policies when he's literally exploiting one of the biggest viruses in our democracy right now, which is money in politics? He is entering this race late, and he's attempting to buy this election. Is that acceptable?
You know, we live in what economists call the world of second best. And clearly, I think all of us would prefer a reform in our politics. And one of the chapters in the book, I try to describe the imbalance of political power, where we've moved to a system of $1, one vote, then one person, one vote. And you're seeing that very viscerally in the idea of possibly having 2 billionaires, or at least one alleged billionaire, one real billionaire, duking it out.
Right.
But as I said, we need that reform. I hope whoever gets in office on the Democratic side, that's going to be one of the first things they do. It was H.R. Bill 1. It was about these democratic reforms. So I think that will happen. We live in a second-best world, and the question is, it is really important, I think everybody believes, to unseat this current president, who is a real threat to our democracy. So the question then becomes, who is the best candidate to do that? And quite honestly, I can't answer that. And that's where the primaries will get us a lot of information. I think that the Democratic primaries have been very useful, very lively in bringing out, as you suggested, different theories of reform.
Yes, theories of change, and I think that's important.
Change. I think that's really important.
Because it's not just about policy proposals, it's about how you plan to get there.
Exactly.
And I think that empowering the electorate, something that a candidate hasn't done for decades, is incredibly important. So that's where my biases lie. I can't help but share it with the audience. I think it's important for them to know what my biases are. But with that said, we have to move on to this rapid-fire personal portion of the interview, if you don't mind. So one of the aims for Google in hosting what we're doing here right now is to reach out to young viewers and get them engaged and involved in politics, which is why I asked you all these questions. And so is there a question that you have for millennials, for instance?
Well, I think one of the important questions that millennials have to face is how they distinguish between truth and misinformation and disinformation. You know, my Nobel Prize was about asymmetries of information, so I thought a lot about information. But when I was writing, we weren't in this world where there is real uncertainty about what the truth is.
Right.
If you committed fraud, it was a crime. We had truth in advertising laws. Now you have Zuckerberg saying, oh, you can put anything up there, a lie, and we're not going to take it down as long as you call it a political speech.
That's right.
And that gives you the right, not only to free speech, it's the right to virality, the right to spread in a way that never before was possible, lies. Given that we have a president who lies multiple times in any one day, the ability to spread lies is enormously dangerous.
Absolutely. So in a few sentences, explain democratic socialism.
So all the democratic socialism, let me first say, it's not socialism as it was understood until, say, 1980. Socialism was the ownership of the means of production, ownership of steel mills, car factories, you know, the basic means. No one is talking about that. No one, says that's the direction we're going. So what democratic socialism is actually very close to what in Europe is called social democracy.
Right.
And, I have a lot of European friends. I spent a lot of time in Europe. And they look at this debate in the United States and they scratch their head.
I know, yes.
Somebody like Macron, to give you one example, who talked today here, French president, a few years ago, Sarkozy, who was on the right, came to the United States, Columbia, and gave a talk. And one of the students asked a question. It was during the Obamacare debate. And he said, what is your feeling about Obamacare? And he began his talk and saying, I'm not going to interfere with American elections.
Yeah.
But then he said, but I just don't understand you. I think all French people believe access to healthcare is a basic human right.
Exactly. And I apologize for asking you to answer that question in a few sentences, because obviously you need a much more comprehensive answer, and you did a great job. Now, last question for you. Please complete the following sentence. The American dream is?
A myth.
I love it.
The American dream, the fact that the idea that anybody can live up to their potential and that you can go from the bottom to the top is aspirational. Some people do it. Mm-hmm. But when a social scientist, like an economist, says there is equality of opportunity, what we mean is, what are the life prospects?
Right.
And the life prospects of a young American are more dependent on the income and education of his parents than in virtually any of the other advanced countries. There are a couple of others, Italy and the UK, that are in that worst group.
Yeah.
But the difference between those countries and the countries that have achieved the American dream, mm-hmm. The equality of opportunity, the Scandinavian countries, even Canada, there's just a huge gap.
There really is.
And that is really a challenge to the young people, how to recreate our society, and it's one of the main points of my book.
I love it. Well, everyone should check out your book. And I know that young people are fiercely in support of the Democratic Socialist candidate in America, Bernie Sanders. And I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please share your comments and your thoughts in the comment section below, and use the hashtag yourMSC on social media so we can see what you have to say and maybe talk about it a little bit in our live stream later. Thank you again. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.